On May 7, 2026, a clerk at Companies House in London accepted a one-page form. The form quietly stripped a Florida billionaire from the control register of Britain's most profitable adult platform. A day later, a new buyer paid $535 million for just 16% of the company. A year earlier, the same business had carried an $8 billion price tag. What broke in those 10 weeks, and why did nobody else want the cheaper version? OnlyFans started in Essex in 2016. Timothy Stokely was the youngest of three brothers from a small town in the south of England. His father, a retired investment banker, wrote him a £10,000 check and told him it was the last one. The operating company behind the site was Phoenix International Limited, registered in London. Tim's brother Thomas ran operations in the early years. His father, Guy, served as a director and handled the balance sheet. It was, on paper, a family business. That didn't last. In 2018, a Florida internet entrepreneur named Leonid Radvinsky took a majority stake in the parent company. He'd built his fortune on a live cam site called My Free Cams, and he had operated more than 10 adult-adjacent sites before he ever touched OnlyFans. But he was deeply secretive, and for years, he kept a remarkably low public profile, while the press slowly pieced together the scale of his stake. Then the pandemic hit, and the numbers got strange. In the year to November 2020, the numbers exploded. Users spent £1.7 billion on the platform. Sales were up more than sixfold, and pre-tax profit jumped from about £6 million to £53 million in a single year. By 2021, the site claimed more than 130 million registered users. For context, that's bigger than the population of Japan. The mechanics were simple. Creators posted content behind a paywall, and then subscribers paid a monthly fee. The platform kept 20% of every transaction. That flat cut was the whole model, and on the numbers, it was one of the most efficient pieces of internet plumbing outside the biggest US tech firms, not least because the cash went straight to the owner. Across 3 financial years through 2023, Radvinsky pulled more than $1 billion in dividends out of the company. One single year payout hit $472 million. The 2025 dividend was $701 million. In that same year, creators on the platform generated $7.2 billion in gross transactions. The 20% cut threw off $1.41 billion in net revenue and $684 million in pre-tax profit. The headcount running the entire machine was around 46 people. That's roughly $15 million of net revenue per employee. Most large tech companies don't get close to that. That's what the outside world saw. It wasn't what any institutional buyer could actually put on its balance sheet. And you can help us take flight. We're trying to get to 100,000 subscribers, and clicking that subscribe button not only keeps you in the loop, but helps us more to make the best content we can. Thank you. The first crack in the business had nothing to do with customers. It had to do with the banks. In August 2021, OnlyFans announced it would ban sexually explicit content from its own platform. The CEO, Tim Stokely, said the decision had been forced on the company by its banks and card networks, and he named names: Bank of New York, Mellon, JP Morgan, Chase. 6 days later, after a creator backlash, the ban was suspended. The episode revealed something structural. OnlyFans couldn't set its own product policy. It could only ratify what the banks and other parties would tolerate. At the same time, it couldn't pivot away from adult content because it would lose its core income. Still, the financial parties kept pressing. By October 2021, MasterCard had rolled out a new policy for adult platforms, requiring identity verification of every performer and a review of every upload before it went live. Then came a string of investigations. Internal moderation logs showed accounts that OnlyFans itself had flagged for possible underage content, then quietly reinstated. Police complaints about minors had been routed to the FBI and the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Children as young as 13 had been found on the site. In January 2025, Reuters revealed a whistleblower complaint filed with FinCEN back in 2023, alleging that MasterCard and Visa had processed payments tied to child essay material without stopping them. What had started as a safeguarding problem was now a payments problem. In December 2021, Stokely stepped down as CEO. He was replaced first by the company's head of communications, Amrapali Gan, in a transition handled in a brief internal note. She didn't last long. By July 2023, Keely Blair, a former privacy and cyber lawyer who was the company's chief strategy and operations officer, was promoted into the CEO chair. It was a clear signal that instead of fighting with customers, they were going to take on the regulators and processors. Then, the regulators hit harder. In 2025, Ofcom, the UK communications regulator, fined the provider of OnlyFans £1.05 million for giving inaccurate and incomplete information about its age-checking system. The company had told Ofcom its facial age estimation challenge age was 23, when in fact it had been set at 20 since late 2021. It had also given the regulator information that turned out to be factually inaccurate. Twice. The fine would have been more, but they'd been given a 30% discount for settlement after an investigation that formally opened in May 2024. 2 years of correspondence, audits, and warnings, all leading to a fine the company decided to settle quickly and quietly. Despite the new CEO, the company didn't fight. It just paid up. But none of this killed the business. Each piece just added one more party. Banks, card providers, governments, whose signature the company needed to keep functioning. By 2025, the list of those counterparties was long, and it was growing. By May 2025, Radvinsky was trying to sell. The buyer at the front of the line was a Los Angeles consortium led by Forest Road Company, with a bid of around $5.9 billion against a headline enterprise value of about $8 billion. Those talks didn't close. By early 2026, a different buyer had taken the lead. Architect Capital, a small San Francisco credit firm founded in 2020 by James Sagan, was in exclusive talks to buy 60% of the company. The new term sheet put the equity at $3.5 billion and stacked about $2 billion of debt on top. Total enterprise value around $5.5 billion. That was already a 28% drop on the Forest Road mark, before anyone had even signed. Then, on March 20th, 2026, before anyone could sign anything, Radvinsky passed away. He was 43 years old. His widow, Yekaterina Chudnovsky, inherited the controlling stake through a family trust. On May 7th, 2026, Companies House accepted the filings that removed Radvinsky from the control register and listed Chudnovsky in his place, effective the date of his death. His directorship was terminated the same day. A day later, the deal that had been on the table closed, but at a very different number. Architect and a group of co-investors took 16% of the company for $535 million. That implied a total valuation of $3.15 billion. Moelis and Skadden advised the seller. Sullivan and Cromwell advised the buyer. A roster of advisors that on any other deal would have been working on a transaction 3 or 4 times the size. In 10 weeks, the headline value of the business had compressed from $8 billion to $3.15 billion, roughly a 60% loss in the space of 2.5 months. Nothing about the actual operating business had changed. The customers and creators were still there, and that lucrative 20% cut was still flowing. What had changed was the man who had personally kept the whole structure together had gone. To know more about companies with big culture changes that affect their value, sign up to my newsletter. I cover distressed debt, leveraged finance, bankruptcies, and restructuring research, so you know which moves to make and when. Click the link in the description. So what did Architect actually buy? On one hand, it had a hyper-efficient software business with 46 employees and over $1.4 billion of net revenue in the year to November 2024. Operating margins most consumer internet companies would kill for. On the other hand, it now owns a stack of obligations to people who don't own a single share of the company. MasterCard's compliance program still controls what the platform can accept and what its moderators must review before publication. The FinCEN whistleblower complaint is still open. Ofcom has fined the UK provider once already, and its age-checking standards keep tightening past the thresholds the company missed before. None of those obligations show up as liabilities on the balance sheet, but every single one of them sets a hard ceiling on what the platform can charge, what it can process, and what it can host. That's why so few buyers were ever willing to write a check. Even with no criminal finding against the company, the reputational weight of the category was enough to push pension funds, sovereign wealth, and the brand name private equity firms straight out of the deal. That's how a company with some of the best operating margins in consumer internet ended up sold in a minority deal to a credit shop most of the finance world had never heard of. The cash was there. The platform still generated $7.22 billion of gross user spending in its last reported year. But the willing equity buyers weren't. That gap is the whole story. A company that prints 9-figure dividends every year should, on any normal multiple, be worth tens of billions. This one wasn't. By the time Radvinsky had pulled more than $1 billion in dividends over 3 years, the equity story already looked less like growth and more like a regulated utility with a very specific set of counterparty problems. And mature utilities don't trade at growth multiples. They trade on whatever cash flow the regulator lets them keep. The easy version of this story is the one you've already heard. A scrappy UK platform rides a pandemic wave. A reclusive owner takes the cash out, and when he passes away, the family sells at a discount. That's accurate on the surface, but it misses something. For the last 4 years, the value of OnlyFans has been set less by its customers, less by its creators, and more by a rotating cast of what you might call non-equity creditors, people who don't own any shares, but who control what the company is allowed to do. The card networks set product policy through their compliance programs. The bank compliance desks decide whether the company has access to deposit accounts at all, which is how the 2021 ban episode actually started. Ofcom sets the minimum age check posture. FinCEN and its whistleblowers set the risk tolerance of those card networks. And inside every major private equity fund, the vice clauses, the rules that bar investment in adult, gambling, and similar businesses, quietly decide who is even allowed to bid. None of those groups own a piece of OnlyFans, but all of them help to price it. That's why the $8 billion mark from the Forest Road round couldn't hold, and the deal eventually closed at $3.15 billion on a 16% slice. The new controlling person on the register is Yekaterina Chudnovsky. The company she sits above now reports to people whose demands keep escalating. If you want to know whether OnlyFans survives the next sale, don't watch the top-line revenue. It's already strong. Watch the card networks and look out for the next Ofcom enforcement letter. Those are the real creditors. To watch more videos about businesses struggling with the perception of who they are in the business world, click on the links.